Everybody, welcome to the FY22 Build to Scale Competition Debrief webinar. I'm Eric Smith. I'm the Director of the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and I'm joined today by Misha McDaniel, one of my colleagues. I'll hand it off to Misha to go over the agenda.
Thanks, Eric. Today we'll be reviewing the competition, what the outcomes from that competition were, discussing the technical requirements for this grant program and trends that we saw in compliance. And we'll also discuss the evaluation criteria, trends that we saw in merit review, and finally, future opportunities to partner and learn about OIE's programming. Back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Misha. So we'll start out with the competition overview, and we'll look at the whole portfolio at a high level. So this year we had $47 million that we deployed, $9.5 million of that across 19 grants in the Capital Challenge, and almost $38 million of that across 32 grants in the Venture Challenge. We were able to make those awards out of $151 million in requested funding. So as usual, a lot of demand, and looking forward to providing you all some feedback via this webinar about opportunities there. Looking at the applicant pool, again, we had about a third come in for the Capital Challenge and the remaining 2/3, a little over that in the Venture Challenge. You can also see the applications by challenge tier. So we had about half of those applications in each of the challenges across each of the tiers. And then you can also see the spread through the regions. We've got some typical heavier interest from our Philadelphia regional office, our Chicago regional office, and our Atlanta regional office, but reflective of the populations in the states that our regional offices cover. Moving on to our map, you can see that we have Venture and Capital Challenge recipients. Those 51 awards were spread all through the country. We really had a wide array of diversity in the types of regions and in the places that those applications came in from and the places we were able to award. So we're excited about that cohort and excited for everybody's interest in the program this year. Let me hand it over to Misha.
Thanks. We want to break down the technical requirements for this competition because as a national competition, we are only able to provide technical guidance while the competition is in place. So the competition starts from the time the notice of funding opportunity is released, and it goes up until the competition deadline. During that period, you may ask for advice on interpreting the technical requirements of this competition, but we may not provide strategic advice on your particular project narrative, your project, or the scope of work that you're considering. So I just want to highlight that at the top. It's important to know the technical requirements because there are very common application flaws that we see in the competition that may make your application ineligible and prevent the award to your organization. So first off, we want to start about identifying whether or not your organization is an eligible entity. You may be familiar with EDA's other programs under PWEDA or EAA. We have a slightly expanded eligibility requirement in terms of the organizations that can apply, and including science and research parks, and economic development organizations, and public-private organizations. If you have questions about how to interpret our entity language or whether or not your entity would be eligible, feel free to contact our office. We also want to highlight missing documentation and under matching. They kind of go hand in hand because under matching and documentation, there are requirements for a commitment letter, which is where you capture that you can meet the match share for the competition. And if those documents aren't provided, then we consider your application under matched. We also cannot accept applications from organizations that are required to provide letters of state support that do not include them. So be sure that you understand the requirements that are specific to your entity type when identifying the documents necessary for your application. Again, we want to emphasize that this is a very common mistake, and some other specific deficiencies that we see in each category are for ineligible entities. This year, because of the transition involved with the UBI number, we want to highlight that getting SAM registration is very important. We recommend having it at the time that you apply, although it's not required until award. So the sooner that you start on that process, the better. Don't want your application to miss out due to a technical and administrative requirement. Furthermore, you might want to look into whether your organization requires a single point of contact notification prior to submitting your award, as this is a requirement under the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And for undermatching, just want to highlight that program income and funds provided by contractors that will be performing services and be beneficiaries under their grant are not eligible sources of match. So you want to understand what constitutes a match. So you and EDA are on the same page about the amounts that are being requested under the application that you're submitting. And we usually provide appendices in our appendix documents, supplementary information to help you in completing your application. One of those appendices is the documents required for various types of entities. We include that and distinguish that these apply to both the lead applicant and co-applicants if applicable. So be sure to review these appendices that also cover the outputs and metrics that we'd like you to provide, and also the budget that can help inform how you put together your application. These aren't required, but these are necessary to help you. But the appendix for technical requirements on documentation, those are required. And finally, we want to talk about alignment with the PGS program goals. As I mentioned, this is different from some of other EDA core programs as it's authorized under Stevenson-Waldler Technology Act. And something that we noticed in this year's competition is that we really want to highlight that we are searching for regional innovation initiatives. This is a regional innovation program. Make sure you're identifying the region and the need when specifying your project plans. We're also highlighting innovation-based businesses in line with EDA's tech-based economic development investment priority, which you can learn more about by visiting the eda.gov website. We're also seeking to scale new products, processes, and service. Commercialization is definitely an aim of Stevenson-Waldler, and we're looking for more and more projects to satisfy this requirement. And finally, we are looking to achieve measurable economic impacts, just like across EDA's other programs, where we're looking at business starts, entrepreneurship, jobs retained and created, in addition to capital range from private sources. And now that we know what we're looking for, let's talk about the more substantive aspects of an application. Eric, back to you.
Thanks, Misha. It's a great transition into talking about how we look at your applications and evaluate them. Let's jump into the first of our 7 evaluation criteria. This first one is focused on ecosystem resources, assets, and equity. Our strong applications this year, showed how they would strengthen the needs and opportunities, and showed that through regional data, not just national data, making sure to really support the case with evidence for the approach. And also clearly identified underserved targets, making sure that it was clear who is going to be served and how exactly the project and the tactics deployed by the project would reach those folks. Unsuccessful applications, on the other hand, often fail to provide evidence. We really do look at data to support the claims that are made in the applications. Sort of cited regional inequity information, but without like really crisply identifying exactly the populations that we're being served and we're being reached out to. And focused on sort of the individual organization's assets and not those assets of the region as a whole. I'll kind of double down on what Misha said earlier before handing it over to her, is that this is a regional innovation program, and we really are looking for those approaches that take a regional perspective. Misha, over to you.
Now let's talk about the proposed solution. So this involves the set of activities that you're going to take in response to the ecosystem needs and opportunity that you identified. So the Aspects of a successful application include having clear outputs and outcomes that are aligned with the needs that you identified in the previous section that Eric discussed. And this can be substantiated by identifying the needs of particular target participants and providing details on how you're going to reach and engage underserved populations. Our assumption is that underserved populations are not being met by the majority and normal business as usual practices. So we're looking for details and justification on how you're going to reach populations that aren't typically served in technology-based innovation forward entrepreneurial support programs. And we also want to know the roles and resources leverages and actionable items for participants and partners. As long as if we can pull out the specific resources and participants in the project, it helps us better determine whether or not there is capacity and feasibility in the application. So that you can see why unsuccessful applications that focus more on what they were doing instead of how they were doing, applications that were really insulated and only focusing on their particular organization instead of what they can provide with regards to the regional solution, and that weren't really in line with what the data was showing or could affect measurable change in underserved communities. And finally, we need a definite, direct definition of target participants. Broad words like underserved participant, minority groups aren't always clear. That helps us identify the feasibility of the outreach and engagement strategies that you identify in your application. So before we go to partner entities, I just also want to highlight that equity is something that we see throughout all of our evaluation criteria. So be sure to consider that at each stage of as you develop your project narrative. Back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Misha. So on to our third criterion, partner entities. Here, I think, echoing some of the themes we've heard, successful applications were really broad in the range of stakeholders that they included. And those stakeholders included members of the target populations for service. And the partners sort of provided specific and tailored evidence of how they were going to support the project, and that there were clear roles and responsibilities, and that the roles and responsibilities weren't just limited to monetary partners. It's really important to have those financial partners in these approaches. Robust funding for these types of programs is really essential to being able to succeed and to continue operations. But I think on the unsuccessful side, when those partnerships are really just about funding, that doesn't necessarily indicate that like true coalition that can really carry this work forward. Also on the unsuccessful side, kind of listing supporting partners, but without real evidence of that support, without evidence of commitment for that support. I think that makes it hard to substantiate and to really kind of understand and evaluate the effectiveness or the likely effectiveness of those partnerships. And in some cases, just missing partners where there were kind of stated goals or stated approaches in the solution that really required some partners in that regional ecosystem. I'll pass it back to Misha.
Yes, it's important for you to really clearly articulate how you're going to achieve the scope of work over the usually typically 3-year performance period. We understand that changes happen, but the more specific that you are on the front end helps us identify how successful the project will be by the end of the performance period. So we're looking for a well-informed baseline, understanding where your community is, can help us evaluate the likelihood of you being able to identify the measurable goals that you state in your grant application. We also look for a demonstrated track record of success. Instead of assumed roles, we need for you to tell us what goals you've achieved and how that is indicative of your future success. And you can say that in the project narrative, or you can substantiate that through letters of support. We're also looking for you to utilize things that we included in our support materials, including a Gantt chart, scope of work that helps us understand the timeline and the expected deliverables across that timeline where milestones and deliverables will be provided. And on the unsuccessful side, just those lack of outcome measures to be able to determine success at the end of the project, and stating an overall vision for change, but not providing clear benchmarks is indicative of poor planning. And we really look for SMART goals that demonstrate the ability of the project to be completed. Back to you, Eric.
Right, and not just measurable goals, but continued impacts are an important criterion that we evaluate proposals on. So looking forward to the future of the program and how it might evolve. I think here really important, successful applications were honest about and upfront about barriers and risks and how they were approaching mitigating those risks. Also looking at kind of plans for sustainability beyond the funding window, and not just sustainability of the project and the tactics that are being deployed within this scope of work, but understanding how the project and the organization might evolve over the coming years to still achieve the goals of the program, even if the particular activities change or the particular needs of the communities change. On the unsuccessful side, I think a lot of these plans can often end up being generalities. It can be, sort of hard to be open about some of those risks and hard to, but we really appreciate that openness. It makes for a more compelling case, even if those risks are real. The other unsuccessful applications focus just on kind of the funding and what the organization would do with the funding, as opposed to what the funding would allow the organization to do broadly over the longer term within the region, within the community. And also really understanding the talent pipeline. This program in particular supports entrepreneurs and access to capital for entrepreneurs, but all of that is dependent on a number of different talent pipelines. And so understanding how and being clear about how the region will attract entrepreneurs and investors and build entrepreneurs and investors is a really important factor as well. Let me pass it back to Misha.
An often overlooked section of a grant application is the budget and staffing. Much as how we were looking for the scope of work and a clear picture and vision of how you're going to achieve the project, we like to verify that by what you list in the budget and staffing plan. That's why it's really important for you to be really clear about the capacity and expertise of the people who will be supporting the day-to-day operations, and also adherence to the uniform guidance and other EDA-specific award conditions that will be necessary to have a successful project. We're also looking for a range of staff members and experts across different phases of the project. We use that as an indicator of gradual engagement, gradual building, and then realizing that different things are different needs may come up during the project's execution. So we want to make sure there's enough capacity on your team to be able to be responsive to risk and also mitigate them when necessary. While on the other side, unsuccessful applications didn't really identify the staff that was connected to the scope of work, nor did they show that they have the numbers or the backgrounds, experience, and track record that would be indicative of success. And also, we included a funding restriction section this year in the NOFO that specifically outlined particular unallowable activities and ineligible expenses. And so make sure you review that if you decide to reapply to Build to Scale, to make sure that the activities and your scope of work is actually feasible. So Eric, can you talk about the alignment with B2S program goals?
Last and not least, alignment with the goals and tying all of this together. So of course, we want to make sure that the projects we're investing in have a high likelihood of achieving the goals and impacts that the program's looking for. And so on the successful side, a lot of that centers around providing targets and that are targets that are measurable and targets that are aligned with what we're trying to achieve in the program to make sure that we're serving community members, that the community members being served are diverse and inclusive, making sure that you're tracking businesses created, making sure that you're tracking capital raised. Aligning with the regional industries and the regional technology focuses is really important as well. Understanding those assets, strengths, gaps, whatever they may be, and understanding how that ties into the technology innovation and technology entrepreneurship ecosystem in your region. And also uplifting industries and communities often overlooked by traditional VC or other investors, making sure that the communities and populations in that region and the industries in that region that have growth opportunity and that can use this investment really have that focus in your application. Looking on the unsuccessful side, just sort of beneficial to the applicant over the region as a whole. These are regional capacity building grants that are meant to support the whole region and the whole ecosystem and the whole economy on the innovation side. Failing to include the equity targets or the equity focus, again, really understanding the DEIA aspects and goals of this program and making sure that they're aligned. And also kind of just a misunderstanding or misalignment of the program goals that we put out there in the notice of funding opportunity. And one particular one to call out is a lack of a focus on technology and technology innovation. I will pass it back to Misha.
Well, I know it's very difficult to contain all the great work that you want to do and the vision that you have for your community in our page limits for the project narrative. So just at a very high level, let's talk about what we're looking for in this section. Not only do we want to hear the vision, but we also want to understand where your region is now. And it really helps if you provide data on industries, the current economic talent pipeline, which we're increasingly looking more at, and then also the strategic gaps in the very complex, nuanced regional ecosystem that you have. We want to be able to understand that you are not only understand what's going on, but you are plugged in, and that's demonstrated by having a variety of partners and being able to clearly define the beneficiaries of your project and have feasible strategies that are likely to engage them. So you can substantiate that with a clear scope of work with a defined timeline and milestones at various parts of the project. So in the post-award side, we can understand and be able to refine and adjust in the event that the deliverables that you set aside are not being met. And so that will help us be able to understand how your project will fit into the grand scheme of your region's economic development horizon. And so because we're looking for a long-term project impact, not just throughout the period of performance. And I also want to talk about the budget narrative. One of my colleagues likes to say that the budget narrative is just as important as the project narrative. If the project narrative is your vision, the budget narrative is kind of what's behind the hood. Do you have enough costs and you understand how much to understanding that you understand the costs associated with delivering your project really makes it more likely that you'll be able to understand plan out a sustainability plan or a plan to scale or not scale this work after the end of the performance period. So being able to identify and justify how federal match funds will be used is really important as we are students of taxpayers' dollars. And we want to make sure that the project activities that you identify are really tied into those budget uses.
All right. Thanks, Misha. So for requesting more feedback beyond what's in this webinar, the first thing to do is to watch this webinar, which I assume you're doing if you've gotten to this point. And then the second thing to do is to write down the strengths and weaknesses of your application after reflecting on that. Put those in an email to us here at OIE, oie@eda.gov. And we'll set up a meeting with you. In preparing for that meeting, there are two additional things we ask. One, reread the application in its entirety, and don't forget the budget, as Misha said, also very important. And make sure to invite members of your project team's leadership. Provides an opportunity to align both the strategy and the tactics that you're thinking about deploying in applying again. Let me hand it back to Misha.
So in the future, if you would like to continue to learn more about OIE funding opportunities, you can always visit our website where you'll find information on our STEM Talent Challenge. As Eric mentioned previously, talent and understanding the pipeline of talent availability is really vital to making sure that the next generation of nationally competitive industries can be sustainable and inclusive. So we have opened up the STEM Talent Challenge to help facilitate that. And for more information on that, when it'll be available in the future, you can also visit our website or subscribe to eda.gov, our updates. You can learn about all the great work that EDA is doing across the country. Eric, what about the status of Built to Scale in 2023?
Yeah, so for all of you who applied to Build to Scale in 2022 and for others interested in the program, we expect Build to Scale to return this fiscal year as well. That's, of course, as always, pending appropriations from Congress. But assuming that that process goes as planned, we expect to open up for application sometime early in the calendar year of 2023. And with that, let me just say thank you again for your interest in the program. Thank you for spending a bit of time with Misha and me today in this debrief. And we look forward to your applications and engaging with you all in the future.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Eric. Goodbye.